We're bringing back to the show today two guests that Crowdsource the Truth viewers will remember: Larry Klayman, who's with us frequently, and Jack Cashill, who we haven't spoken to in some time. Gentlemen, hello.
Good to see you.
The same.
Yes,
Jason.
Very good to see both of you guys. Now, I don't know if viewers are aware of this, but you two know each other actually quite well. And it wasn't until I was working with Larry 2 or 3 weeks ago to record the Citizens Grand Jury, which people can still see over at freedomwatchusa.org and in a variety of other places. But you know, Jack, while Larry and I were driving around and preparing everything for the Citizens Grand Juries, we had opportunity to speak quite a bit, and this new FBI document about the investigation into the very strange death of Ron Brown was a topic we covered, and I didn't realize how pivotally involved Larry was at the time everything went down. Do you guys want to give us a little bit of an overview of how things happened, and then we can get into what we've learned from this new FBI document?
And then I'll turn over to Larry because he has a background that I don't have. Larry was the one who opened the doors for me on this. I wrote a book called Ron Brown's Body, which was published in 2004, I believe. But Larry made the book possible by introducing me to the woman who's at the center of the story, is Yolanda Butler Hill. And I remember meeting with Larry back then in Judicial Watch's offices in Washington, and I was very grateful for his help. Larry's background I do not know in regard to this case, but I know he was working on it before I was.
Well, Jack, you wrote a great book, and let me give everybody a little synopsis here, because it's a long story, and in fact, you're a much more accomplished author than I am, but I wrote a book called Whores: Why and How I Came to Fight the Establishment, and there are 2 or 3 chapters in there about the Chinagate scandal and Ron Brown, but here's how it started. I was a private international lawyer, a litigator, international trade lawyer, regulatory lawyer, and I was coming back from Los Angeles, and I saw to Washington, D.C., which is where my office was at the time, and I saw an article in Business Week that says, Clinton cozies up to business, and it talked about Bernard Schwartz of L'Oreal Corporation. He was bragging that he gave $100,000 to the Democratic National Committee to go on a trade mission to China and other places, to have the government do his business at L'Oreal. And of course, we later found out, as the scandal unfolded, and I'll tell you about that he had transferred high-tech missile technology to improve the accuracy of Chinese nuclear missiles, nuclear-tipped missiles, to the communists. But back at that time, what really offended me, because I was an antitrust lawyer at the Justice Department in the Antitrust Division, was how can the government be paid $100,000 to do business when Larry Klayman, with a small law firm, couldn't afford that? Number one, it's illegal. You can't have the government paid off to help you do business in a foreign country. So I filed a Freedom of Information Act request asking for information about all of Ron Brown. He was the Secretary of Commerce at the time, trade missions. This was the centerpiece of the Clinton administration in terms of trade, these trade missions, and Brown was very proud of them. And I was stonewalled in those requests. In fact, I got a call from an individual who claimed I really didn't need that information. All I needed was the Business Week article, but I wanted to know who went, I wanted to know what was donated, and what the circumstances were in selecting them. And I filed a lawsuit when I didn't get a response to that Freedom of Information Act request, and by the grace of God, it landed in front of the most courageous judge I found in my 42 years of legal practice, Judge Royce C. Lamberth of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. And in the course of that case, we uncovered that, in fact, Ron Brown had not produced internal documents because he was orchestrating these trade missions himself. He was working not just with Brown at the Commerce Department, but with someone called Melissa Moss, who worked for Brown because Brown had been the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, the all-time biggest fundraiser in Democrat history at that time, later surpassed only by Terry McAuliffe.
Oh.
And you can imagine the two of them, okay? So I kept pushing in front of Lambert to get the documents that Brown had generated because none were being produced out of his office. And I actually got the judge to order the deposition of Ron Brown. And we took the deposition of many people in the Commerce Department, deposed nearly the entire Clinton White House looking for these documents. In the course of doing it, we even found out that Leon Panetta had told Brown to slow roll production. He actually obstructed justice. Panetta was Clinton's White House chief of staff. To make the long story short, and this is where Jack comes in, Brown, because of what we had uncovered at Judicial Watch, became subject to an independent counsel investigation by a person by the name of a lawyer, Daniel Pearson, in Miami, Florida. And this will key into the documents that were just produced by the FBI. And Pearson was narrowing and zeroing in on Brown and his acceptance of bribes, in effect, on behalf of the Democratic National Committee and the Clinton-Gore re-election campaign from people like Bernard Schwartz and other prominent businessmen and companies to actually help them do business. And what happened at the time, and it's a very long story, but Nolanda Hill came forward. Nolanda Hill had been the girlfriend of Ron Brown. Ron Brown was married, but that didn't stop him in having a bunch of marital affairs. And Nolanda Hill was being investigated for tax fraud. And she revealed to me, Brown had already been killed in a plane crash in Croatia. She revealed to me that before Brown was sent to Croatia by Clinton on a trade mission, he had gone in to see him at the White House, saw him in the Oval Office. He was walking around like a hillbilly with bare feet, an Arkansas hillbilly, literally.
Like a hillbilly?
Right. Sat down in his chair with his feet up on a footstool, and Brown says to him, Bill, the independent counsel in Miami is closing in on me, my son Michael, who was assisting Brown allegedly in a lot of illegal dealings, and his daughter Tracy, the same. And I'm going to have to cooperate with this independent counsel. Otherwise, not just yours truly can be thrown in jail, not just my business partner, Nolanda Hill, he didn't say that was his girlfriend, but my family, my son and my daughter. And Clinton, according to Nolanda Hill, who was waiting outside for Brown as he went into the White House in a car on Pennsylvania Avenue. It wasn't closed off at that time. 9/11 hadn't happened yet. He folded his arms and said in a very terse, cold way, "That's nice, Ron." And Ron just felt this icy cold presence, and he left. Now, a week later, he was sent to Croatia on a trade mission by Clinton. And at that time, Brown was enmeshed in a lot of different scandals at the time. It was reported that he had maybe done business with arms dealers, in China and elsewhere. And everything was swirling around him. And when he went over to Croatia, it was on the same plane, ironically, that Hillary Clinton had taken just a week before. She was in Europe. It was a military transport. And to make the long story short again, it crashed on a mountain in Croatia. And at that time, it was believed that it was an accident. But after that happened, the bodies were sent back to Dover, Delaware, the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. And the photographs of Ron Brown's body were put up on a light box. And pathologists saw that in those photographs of his skull, there was a hole the size of a 10 caliber bullet, which is very close to a 45 caliber bullet. And those x-rays were confiscated, and there was never an autopsy done of Ron Brown. And later there was a funeral, and Clinton was actually seen going into the funeral to National Cathedral laughing. Whoa. At the time. Unbelievable. And Brown had information that would have implicated Bill and Hillary Clinton to this illegal bribery scheme. Not only that, in the course of producing documents, which we did get, we never got Brown's documents, and Nolanda Hill had told me that, those were hidden away, that he did have a lot of documents of correspondence with regard to bribes. Now, why was Nolanda trying to help me? Because she was subject to possible indictment, which she later was indicted by Eric Holder at the Justice Department, who was Deputy Attorney General under Janet Reno at the time. So she asked me for her help to try to avoid getting indicted, and in exchange, she gave me this information, and I took it to Judge Lamberth. But it turns out that in the course of producing documents, which we did get in that case, an individual by the name of John Wong was exposed. And he worked for the Riyadi family, who had very close ties to the Chinese Politburo. And he was previously to joining Ron Brown, because he was actually assisting Brown at the Democratic National Committee, placed there by the Clintons, then put in the Commerce Department to orchestrate these trade missions to China, that it was believed that John Wong was a communist Chinese spy, and he was getting briefings from the CIA on economic intelligence, classified briefings. So this thing erupted into a huge scandal. Even Woodward started to follow it, Bob Woodward. He was kind of jealous that maybe this scandal would eclipse this Watergate scandal, so he figured he better get involved. I met him, at Billy Martin's Tavern in Georgetown. I don't think he wanted to be seen with me. He wanted to be seen with a conservative. So he sat in the back of the room. It was very, very dark. And this thing was erupting to the biggest scandal in American history since Teapot Dome. Very similar scandal many years earlier under the Harding administration with bribery and everything else, corruption. So this whole thing was moving forward, and it was very convenient that Ron Brown died because he was a material witness. And of course, we know that about 80 witnesses in all of the Clinton scandals, I mean, there were about 40 by the time they left office, a new world indoor record for scandals by a president, that it was very convenient that he died. Now, fast forward a little bit, because I'm continuing to take depositions. The Commerce Department actually agreed to pay me $2 million if I would stop, but I told Judge Lamberth, I said, look, I can't sell out, me meaning Judicial Watch, and neither can you, Judge. So he allowed me to continue on. And I took the deposition of an individual by the name of Johnny Chung, who had come forward, been exposed. He had run a blast fax service. In those days, faxes were in. We're talking about, the late 90s. And he was working with Chinese intelligence. And he laundered $50,000 to pay Hillary Clinton what in effect was a bribe in the White House. He described it as, you have to pay the money to get the turnstiles to let you in. He actually handed a check to Hillary for $50,000, which was a campaign contribution. You can't take a campaign contribution on government property. And not only that, it was, $49,998,000 over the legal limit, right? So
this is a foreign national,
Yeah, so I'm collapsing all of this. You can get my book still. It's on Amazon, and you can read Jack's book as well, which touches on these things. Well, I took the deposition of Johnny Chung, and during that deposition, I told him how I had represented, Taiwanese and Chinese people as an international trade lawyer. I showed him that I wasn't hostile to him. He was being represented by a lawyer named Brian Sun, who was an opportunist, later represented Wen-Ho Lee, the Chinese American who took nuclear codes from Los Alamos. And I showed him that I liked Chinese people, that they were my clients, they were my friends. So he came to me afterwards and he said to me, Larry, will you represent me? And I thought about it, and I said, gee, this is great. I'm going to get to represent Johnny Chung. He has inside information on this whole bribery scheme. And he revealed in his deposition, and to me thereafter, that he was told by Chinese intelligence that they had put a hit out on Ron Brown in conjunction with Bill Clinton, and that it was convenient for both of them to have him dead. And Nolanda believed that. And thereafter, in another FOIA request, we uncovered documents which showed that Ron Brown was alive after the crash, and that it's likely that a party came along to kill him, to make sure he was dead. I remember one time I gave a speech and I told this story a little more cogent fashion than I'm telling it today. I got up at 2:30 a.m. today to come back from. from the holiday. But the people that I gave the speech to were chanting, it must be the Croatians that did it. Well, it was very unlikely that it was the Croatians that did it. It was most likely a combination of the Communist Chinese and the Clinton administration. But Johnny, later on, I'll tell you a funny story, which was very helpful. I gave a speech in La Cañada, California. It's in Los Angeles, at a state congressman's house. And someone charged at me and tried to harm me.
Wow.
And Johnny was the guy who ran in front of this guy that was about ready to harm me. He was some crazy guy with La Raza, and protected me. And that meant a lot to me, because I've always been a friend of the Chinese people. I've not been negative to them, although the Clinton administration tried to brand everybody who was looking into this scandal as racist. And the bottom line is this, is that Jack wrote a book, an excellent book, Ron Brown's Body, and the thesis of that book, I don't know if you reached the conclusion or just set out the facts. I did read it, but it's been a while, is that Ron Brown was killed because it was convenient to kill him. And this was another one of the Clinton witnesses that went by the wayside, and this one could have taken down the Clinton administration. Along came Monica Lewinsky in the course of this scandal, and the press went off on, sex and that kind of thing.
The Monica story, bizarrely, saved the Clinton White House.
Yeah, that was the lightning rod to take the heat off of Clinton, so to speak. And I used to say, and then of course, because of all of this, Clinton was so distracted with the Chinagate scandal, his other 39 scandals, the impeachment, is that while Clinton was frankly having oral sex in the White House, frankly, I think he probably had more than that, but let's just say that he was doing that.
His personal humidor.
Yeah, it was the American people who were getting screwed, so to speak. So that's the short end of the story. There's 3 chapters in my book about this, and Jack's book, which I hope people will also pick up, because, Ron Brown has not gone away. He's come back with a vengeance for whatever reason, and it's exemplary of what's going on today. I mean, this is a warm-up act to the Clintons, decades-long history of engaging in bribery and corruption and enriching themselves either politically or personally at the expense of the American people. And what was ironic, in talking to Nolanda Hill, and Jack can talk about it, and I'll stop talking now, is that Nolanda, gave me an insight as to who Ron Brown was. And her, of course, she had, rose-colored glasses. She was in love with him. She said, he wasn't a bad person. He lived beyond his means. He was always looking to make money, to pay his debts. And he frankly hated Hillary Clinton. And he didn't like Bill Clinton either. And he didn't really want to do these trade missions, is that Hillary ordered him to do it on behalf of the president to raise money for their reelection, because they were in trouble at the time. The polls were down. Clinton had gotten into scandals. He had, gays in the military, everything else which wasn't popular then, set off a chain reaction, and he needed to be reelected. His standing was lower than President Trump's is right now at the time. So they needed a lot of cash, and Brown's response when Hillary ordered him to go on these trade missions to shake the money tree was, excuse the French, I'm not Hillary's motherfucking tour guide. But he did it, and he paid for it with his life.
Wow. Well, Jack, your book, Ron Brown's Body, carries the subtitle here, How One Man's Death Saved the Clinton Presidency and Hillary's Future. Help us understand how the death of Ron Brown did that, and why we're hearing about it from the FBI now.
Larry remembers the story very well. He was the first person in on it. When I got the book contract, in fact, I went to meet with Larry in Washington. He introduced me to Nolanda, which was a story in itself. Nolanda and I remained friends, and I think she's a real truth teller. Every story that I could verify that she told me was verifiable. But what happened when I got the contract, I talked to my publishers, and I said, listen, All I can tell you is you have to be able to live with this fact that there's a possibility the plane just crashed because stuff happens, And they said they could live with that because I said, I'm not going to invent a murder plot if it doesn't exist.
Right.
So they agreed with that. So I concentrated on why the plane went up. There was a ton of story there. The 95, 96, the two most corrupt years in American history. And Larry gets into some of the details here, but in retrospect, it's hard to believe how utterly, totally corrupt it was. Because in 94, in November, because of the Clintons, the Democrats lost control of the House for the first time in 40 years. They lost control of the Senate. Clinton was looking at Bob Dole was up 20 points on the polls, and they started the most desperate, pathetic pursuit of cash ever. And they got away with it. But a curious thing happened, Jason, and that was that as I was getting into the story, I sent a FOIA request for the U.S. Air Force report, and I had at that up to a certain point, I wasn't really expecting to get anything from it. I had a lengthy summary. I figured that would be adequate, and then I had an email back from the Air Force in Ramstein, Germany, and they said, yes, you can have the report, but it's going to cost us X thousands of dollars. It's all 22-volume paper report. There's no electronic files, and it'll take months for us to get it.
Wow.
So I emailed them back and I said, because I wasn't that interested in the plane crash. Oddly, I was interested more in the shenanigans that led to the Ron Brown boarding that airplane. And I said, well, I'm going to have to live without it because I just don't have the time or the money for that. And then a day later, or within 24 hours, I get an email from a colonel, and he said, not some functionary like the first person, he said, the report will be there within a week and we're waiving all fees.
Wow.
Which told me that the Air Force wanted the truth told. And here's what's really appalling. The New York Times had a reporter on the plane that crashed, and he was killed. I was the first person in the media to request the report. And I requested it 8 years after the fact, 7 years after the fact. And it came on a pallet. That's how big the report was.
Wow.
So I had recently written a book on TWA Flight 800, which also happened in 1996, clearly the most corrupt year in American political history. And as a result of it, I was in touch with a lot of high-level TWA captains, and I gave them the technical details, and then I went into the rest of the information, the interviews, the forensic reports, all that sort of stuff. And at the end of the day, the conclusion I came away with, and also, by the way, I became friends with Kathleen Janowski, the woman who discovered the hole in Ron Brown's head, and she remains a friend to this day too, as does Nalanda. At the end of the day, I came away concluding this, that the dispassionate observer, looking at the facts of the case, would be very well within reason to believe that Ron Brown had in fact been murdered. What the pilots concluded, looking at all the technical data, and I defer to them on this, is that the plane had been lured off course by a phenomenon called meekening. These are primitive airports post all the war in the Balkans. The airports have been stripped of their more sophisticated equipment. They were piloting in on a single radio signal, and all you had to do was set up a signaling land a mile, and you draw the course of the plane right into it. It was overcast day. They flew a perfectly controlled flight right into the side of a mountain. And Larry's right. There were survivors. There was at least one known survivor for a while. And my conjecture is just as Larry said, Ron Brown's body was found away from the airplane, and the people I've talked to at Dover told me that other than the hole in the top of his head, his body was intact. There was no other obvious terminal injury. And curiously, in the death reports, everyone else is the death description is blunt force injury. Brown's a blunt force injury to the head. It specifies that very specifically. And and this is where it gets really perverse, it wasn't until December 1997 the pathologist at Dover and the photographer, Mishnosky, went public with their information and about what they had found. And Larry's right, there was no autopsy. They didn't tell the family about the hole in the head. They buried the body quickly. There was no, the Air Force was forced to bypass the safety investigation, which looks into the cause of the crash, and go right to the accident investigation, which means this was an accident. Let's see how an accident could possibly have been caused. They were published in December 1997, and they went through, was it the Pittsburgh Tribune, the SCAFE publication, and it was going to die. The major media was fully planned to overlook all of this information. You have 3 pathologists demanding an autopsy. The major media don't want to know. But then what happened is it like a rogue salmon. It jumped stream from the conservative media into the black media. And it was getting front page stories on all the major black newspapers throughout the country. Finally, Kwesi Mafumi, then I think he was head of the Black Caucus, comes on board. Jesse Jackson comes on board. He starts asking questions. Mike McCrory at the press aide to the Clintons is finally asked about this in a press conference. He gives a stammering response. Well, this is nonsense. This is conspiracy. The black press is really hitting them hard on this because Ron Brown was the most popular black politician in the country at the time. And then immediately after this, in January 2000, January 1998, the Monica story breaks, right? And Jesse Jackson jumps ship and becomes, the Clinton spiritual advisor, and the whole story dies. Right?
Well, that's right. Jack, what's really interesting is that at the time I had extra office space at Judicial Watch. The office would previously my law firm, then it got converted to Judicial Watch as Judicial Watch grew in those years. And I had rented an office to John Conyers, the then head of the House Judiciary Committee, the African-American congressman. Now, Conyers was clueless. He's actually an interesting person. He's now out of Congress, fell victim to the current Me Too atmosphere. He may be guilty. I don't know whether he is or he's not. But when I was taking the deposition of John Wong, he came into the lobby of Judicial Watch. This is where he had his campaign office. And he didn't even know I was deposing Wong. But I went out to dinner with him once. And I asked him, I said, what do you think of Ron Brown? And he says, a scallywag. Never liked the guy, frankly. And then I later went to Brown's funeral, to see who was there, at the time. And I went to John Conyers' fundraiser. I actually gave him $100 of my own money just to pay for the food. The only politician I've given money to, probably ever. But what was interesting about Conyers is that after the Brown tragedy and the death, he came to me and he said, Larry, because we had already had dinner and I told him what I was doing, he said, I think he was killed, and I think there's a chance that the Clintons did it. And he actually had me come over with the pathologists, with Kathleen and with 2 other pathologists, and we went to a skiff in the bottom of the House of Representatives. And it was soundproof, and it's tape recorded. I suspect they still have it, probably in their archives. And he spewed forth to Conyers what was going on, and the Congressional Black Caucus was demanding an investigation. And it was during that period that I was on black entertainment television more than any white man in the history of BET. And so much so they didn't have makeup for white people.
Wow.
And but Conyers was a very interesting guy, I tell you, because he was always honest with me. He was nice to me, and he told me the BS that went on Capitol Hill, and he believed, and he became a Clinton supporter too, just like Jesse Jackson. He let it drop. He took the bigger issue, but he believed that Clinton had Brown hit. He believed that.
It's
That
really
was
interesting.
widely believed in the black community. Just a quick anecdote. When I was sending out some sample copies of the book in 2004 on my local post office, and I had a black clerk, an older guy, and he asked me, he said, "Oh, are these books?" I said, "Yeah." "Are they yours?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "What are they about?" I said, "They're about Ron Brown." And this is a largely black post office. All the workers were anyhow. As soon as I said that, the whole place falls quiet. And then he looks up at me and says, "Did they kill him?" Right?
Well, Tavis Smiley was, their lead host on BET at the time. He believed that there was a hit on Brown, and I
should have one more detail about that. What I think happened, and you're right. Nalanda believes the Chinese were involved, but it would have to have been done by the Croatian intelligence. They were totally indebted to the Clinton administration. And they wouldn't have done it on their own. There's no
Well, they were
reason
just
to
the
do
trigger
this on
men,
their own.
though, right, Jack?
Yeah. But the Tudjmans, they were this like neo-fascist, autocratic entity running Croatia. The son of Franjo Tudjman, I think, was the head of the country. His son Emilio, I believe, was the head of intelligence. All it would have taken was they knew where the plane crashed, where it had crashed. The NATO was sidetracked. They were looking at over the Adriatic for 4 hours before anyone found it. All it would have taken is for them to go up. They're looking at photos, and they execute the coup de grace here just to make sure he's dead. He may have been dead already, because the only one survivor was in the back of the plane, and she died later that day. She wasn't murdered like people thought. She wasn't murdered by special forces. No special forces came in. The Croatian, rescue people did a good faith effort to try to save her, and they couldn't. It was totally suspicious. Totally suspicious.
Well, it was, and the Congressional Black Caucus, Conyers and company, were asking themselves the question, so was Tavis Smiley, if this had been a white cabinet secretary, would there have been an autopsy? That they took it personally, in a way. And Nolanda, I don't know what she said to you, Jack, but she also believed that Clinton was behind it, at least when I talked to her.
Yes, absolutely.
And
in fact, she told me the story about the meeting in the White House, down to the bare feet, the stocking feet, which offended Brown because he was so meticulous, addressing, and so a believer in formalities, and she also implied that he asked, and she was a little more specific, or maybe I remember a little better because I wrote the book, but according to her, Nalanda, they role played before they went in, how to approach the subject, what to say. And Brown's trump card was China. What he was most concerned about was his son, Michael, who was the father of twins, baby twins, and he was part of the deal. He was implicated by the independent counsel. He was implicated for his role in this whole Oklahoma gas thing, which was involved, minority contracting, which was, of course, Brown's bread and butter. And she said that Brown played the card. He said, "Listen, if you can't get Michael off, I don't care about me. You have to get Michael off." And Clinton said, "I can't do anything about that. He's under scrutiny." He probably couldn't do anything, but given the scrutiny he was under at the time.
You're right, Jack. Nolanda said to me,
then I'm going to talk. I'm prepared to talk about China.
Quote from Nolanda, and they were concerned about Michael also because of what he knew of what was going on.
Right.
Quote, "Michael is dumber than a rock."
Right.
Quote from Nolanda.
I think he tried his bar exams 18 times or something and never passed.
Nolanda had a premonition, too, is that she thought something might happen. So she gave Ron, she called him Ron, an Indian artifact.
Right.
When he went over on the plane to Croatia, and apparently they found it, in the wreckage. He kept it with him. She was his main squeeze. But I also interviewed, I don't know if you talked to her, Liliana Madsen. This was another one of his mistresses.
Right. Yeah, I never talked to her, but I'm well aware of her, yeah.
The Haitian, and Michael, the classy person he was, apparently had rented a condo for her so his dad could partake,
Right.
and no one would trace the fact that Brown was behind having put her into a condo as his concubine. But it's just an unbelievable story. And now, of course, we've got, I guess, about 20 minutes left in this segment as the documents are coming out from the FBI after all these years, showing that the FBI was investigating Brown. They wiretapped him, apparently, which is not unusual given the fact that, there was this scandal going on and an independent counsel investigation, Dan Pearson in Miami. But some of the early documents, I'm sure you've seen them, suggest that he was involved in some kind of bribery scam with Vietnam as well. And, it's all just bringing everything forward to, 2018 is that, this was just a warm-up act for the Clintons,
right,
in the next 20 years.
And the bribery scandal, in fact, I covered that in some detail, and it was extremely well documented at the time. And it's outrageous. Brown was such a whore. And Melinda loved him, you're right, but she knew that he was a flawed human being. But he by taking the commerce job, which was he thought beneath his dignity, he wanted to be head of state, it cost him a lot of money because he had divested a lot of his interests and sell off all of his minority shares and all these, various pass-through projects. And the one deal that cost him, he had to give up a $700,000 payoff. So when the North Vietnamese, I guess then Vietnam, tried to approach him, they arranged 3 meetings for him, all documented. He demanded $700,000. The meeting started before he was nominated to become Commerce Secretary. They concluded even after he was in office. And now it wasn't a it was no longer with Patton Boggs as a lobbyist. He was the Secretary of Commerce taking a $700,000 bribe. They had him dead to rights. And this is where Clinton had Janet Reno's old district, and they had to, they pulled the string so that he didn't come to trial. But they held it over his head for the rest of his tenure. He knew he was their bagman after that. He was totally indebted to them for bailing him out on Vietnam. He would have gone to prison for years if they had allowed this process to go through. The FBI documents show that this is not just, right-wing conspiracy talk.
Well, what does this tell you? You go to the Commerce Department today off of Constitution Avenue, and it's Ron Brown Boulevard.
That's crazy.
14th Street. So he's been deified there, and that's right across from the African American Museum that Obama built. But here's the ultimate irony and the ultimate paradox, is that in today's world, you would not have an African American cabinet secretary subject to being wiretapped or investigated, because that would be verboten. You'd be called a racist, everything else in the world. It wouldn't happen. And it shows you how we've degenerated in terms of equal justice in this country. But yeah, Brown was in a lot of trouble. Clinton was in a lot of trouble. He was on the ropes. Bob Barr and I wanted to impeach Clinton primarily on the Chinagate scandal. So did the House impeachment manager, Dave Schippers. Newt Gingrich would not allow that to happen. They just wanted to wound Clinton. They knew that Monica Lewinsky wouldn't take him out of office. It wouldn't take him out. They just wanted to wound him enough that it would rub off on Al Gore, and George W. Bush or somebody like that could be elected in the year 2000. That's the thesis, that I have in my book. And of course, now we have a new impeachment proceeding brewing, and they're not going to take Trump out either, but they're just trying to wound him. They're doing the Clinton playbook, the Democrats. They're doing to Trump what in fact occurred as a result of Newt Gingrich with regard to Clinton. Just wound him enough to influence the next election.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to, excuse me, Jack.
Kelly.
Sorry, if I could interject, I want to ask a few questions about Shelley Kelly and a couple of other details that are coming to mind as you guys speak. Of course, Shelley Kelly, as you pointed out in the book, Jack, was the only initial survivor of the crash, died on the way to the hospital. I find it interesting that I didn't know about this until right now. You mentioned the black leaders were seeking a probe, and I Googled very quickly and came across this Los Angeles Times article from December 1997, about a year and a half after the crash. This article reports that a total of 35 died, so it's talking about Ron Brown. He died along with 34 others. That would be 35 total dead, and certainly Shelley Kelly would have been reported dead at the same time everybody else was, because I don't think there would have been much reporting on this in the duration between the crash being discovered and her going to the hospital. But initially, the New York Times very oddly reported that 33 died. And people who watch
Americans. That may be the distinction.
Sorry?
There were 2 Croatians on the plane. Joe Kelly, and reading the Air Force reports on that, they're totally credible. She was badly injured. And
sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, Jack.
They had to carry her down on a litter. I mean, they couldn't even airlift her out of there. Pouring rain. The rainstorm started, by the way, after the plane crash, not at the time the plane landed. There was no. That was the story they put out. It was a terrible rainstorm. No, it wasn't even raining when the plane landed. 4 other planes landed right before them, including the plane from Enron, which is another big part of this story.
Yeah.
That is just, I could write a book on that alone,
The other thing is that Ron Brown had a compartment at the back of the plane, where he could sleep. There was a sleeping quarters there. And everybody knows, if you ever take a plane, by the way, the safest place to be is in the back. I like to be in the front because I want to get out quick. But the safest place is in the back, and the tail just broke off, apparently. And he did survive, and, most likely he was shot to make sure he was dead.
Kelly was in the rear. That's where she was, and which is why she survived. Just one anecdote here that I think sheds some light on the way this whole thing came down. In the Air Force interviewed about 175 people after the crash. They were talking to, at the time, Peter Galbraith, who was the ambassador to Croatia, Clinton's ambassador to Croatia. And he was a real Democratic operative. And they said to him, is there anyone we should talk to that we might not think about? And he said, yes. He goes, there's this woman named Zdenka Gast. She's a Croatian American. She was the liaison between Croatia and the Enron Corporation. See, Brown was being sent to Dubrovnik to broker a deal between Tudjman and Enron. This is the dirty part of this whole secret. And then Galbraith said to the Air Force guy, he said, Zenka was supposed to be on the Brown plane, but at the last minute she got off and got on the Enron plane.
Oh.
And so then the Air Force guy, this is all in the interviews, in the documented interviews, the Air Force guy says, that's exactly the person we need to talk to. Well, they interviewed 175 people, and one of them was Zdenka Gast, I called. She lives, I'm upstate New York. She's in Buffalo, about an hour away. And I said, and I didn't want to deceive them. I told them exactly why I was calling, talking to their secretary. Her husband has a ironworks company. And the secretary, whoever, said, yeah, I know she'll want to talk to you. I'll have her call you right back. That's the last ever. I could never get through to Zdenka Gast after that. Then this is the hysterical part. I'm working with a Croatian interpreter, and I look up Zdenka online, and I see her at a picture of her, arm in arm with 2 other women. It's a Croatian equivalent of People magazine. I called my interpreter. I said, okay, what am I looking at here? What are we reading about? Because the 2 women were, like the 3 amigas there. Under her left arm was Alexis Herman, who was the Secretary of Labor, and also at that time the woman who dispatched Brown on his fatal journey. And under her right arm, you want to take a guess? Hillary Clinton, right?
Is this Zdenka Gast right here, Jack, that I'm showing?
What's that?
Is this
Zdenka there?
Is that her?
I saw the photos of her when she was younger, and pretty attractive, actually. That looks like her, though.
Actually, one of the photos there, Jack, is my former client, Dolly Kyle Browning, a 21-year relationship with Clinton.
But in any case, I thought when I was reading about this, I thought it must have been some big fundraiser, and she just, bogarted her way into getting pictures taken. No, she was there at the White House for Alexis Herman's wedding, staged by the Clintons, and there were no more than 40 people there, and you'd heard of the other 39. They named some of them, Al and Tipper Gore, et cetera,
Yeah. Let me bring
and
you
the
for a
media had no
second.
interest in it. And when the Enron story broke, they didn't want to talk to me about that either.
Yeah. Well, obviously they wouldn't, right? I want to bring you back just for a second, because the thing I was trying to point out, I'm not questioning the accuracy of the Air Force report. I'm just pointing out this number 33. I find it comes up very often, and I believe it is a coded message. I believe this is an example of steganography, and I think this happens often. I've spoken to Larry how we've seen it occur in the Washington Post, an issue that we're looking into from 1979. But this use of the number 33, how many emails does Hillary Clinton claim to have destroyed? 33,000, it's way more. I invite everyone watching to keep their eyes out for the number 33 and notice where it shows up. I think
What
it's
is the
indicating.
hour? What is the hour of the devil? 3 a.m.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, there's
Get up
another
at
point
3
I want to
a.m.
bring
and
up.
you have to go to the bathroom. Beware of the devil. He may be waiting for you.
Right. If you read an
Jesus
article about Hillary
was
Clinton,
crucified, so you never know.
and if you read an article about Hillary Clinton and see the number 33 there, I think you should be very cautious about that. Now, Jack, another item that comes up, or I should say another individual that comes up in the book, Ron Brown's Body, which people can get from barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com. I presume they can get it from Cashill.com as well. One of the, I guess he was a lieutenant at the time, one of the medical examiners was a guy who is Dr. Craig Malik. Is there anything that you want to say about him?
Was he one of the pathologists?
I believe he was. He also presently, or at least about a year ago, he was the medical examiner in Broward County who presided over the autopsy of Barrington Wisenant. The first.
Yeah, the only name I remember of the pathologist was Cogswell, who was the most vocal. And they destroyed all their careers. Janoski and three of the pathologists had their careers destroyed.
They
Why
were
was
both
that?
clients, Cogswell and Janoski. Those are the two I took to see John Conyers underground at the House of Representatives.
One other detail that needs, I think, that is totally among the most suspicious, was the death of Nico Jerkuik. Jerkuik was the aviation systems manager at the airport at Chilpai, I think it was called, and outside of Dubrovnik. And he just happened not to be present the day that Brown's plane crashed. 3 days later, literally, just before his interview with the Air Force, he was found with a shotgun blast to his chest, dead.
Wow.
And the New York Times, in its wisdom, decided he had killed himself because he was heartsick over a failed romance. Only in Croatia,
Right. Well,
yeah, there was that's similar to Vince Foster. How people push that to a suicide. But it's not very funny. It's kind of black humor, no pun intended. But the joke in Washington at the time, when Ron Brown was told that he had to go to Croatia by Bill Clinton, was, quote, "I need to go to Croatia like I need a hole in the head." That was the joke.
It is kind of black. It's kind of dark, but it's kind of funny because he didn't want to go.
He didn't want the hole either, but he got both.
I'm not Hillary's MFing tour guide. And when I brought Nolanda to Judge Lambert, he put her on the witness stand. We have sworn testimony with Nolanda about all of this, which you can probably find in that file. I believe the case was filed in 1996, and the number is 0133.
What?
The civil action number. I'm sure that her testimony is probably in the file.
Wow.
So,
no.
But this is all a lesson in terms of how things have degenerated since. I mean, to bring it current, Ron Brown was the precursor to what you see in the swamp today in a major way. I mean, obviously there's been bribery, going back into world history, but Brown was the number one money changer at that time. And then, of course, you have Terry McAuliffe. He did a bunch of illegal things, and he actually surpassed Brown in fundraising for the DNC.
Including for Mrs. McCabe,
Yeah,
Right.
and the Commerce Department is a coveted post, Secretary of Commerce, coveted by people in both political parties, because you see the Commerce Department They give out a bunch of goodies. It's like a candy store. And in exchange for all the subsidies to do business and the help and everything else, these corporations line the pockets of the president and other politicians that put them in power. And the Commerce Department has historically been the most corrupt. President Reagan wanted to abolish it. He never got around to it. But it basically distorts, for the most part, other than its information gathering, which can be helpful, it distorts competition because it rewards those who pay off the party in power.
And what do we think about the guy who refinanced Donald Trump's bankruptcy being the Commerce Secretary now?
Well, I don't know much about him, but he doesn't. Obviously, he's not impressive. I mean, you've educated me a little bit, Jason, about him. But, this is a post. I remember Bush put his fundraiser in this post, too, George W. Bush. I forget his name right now. This was the guy who supposedly caused W to go on the wagon a night that he allegedly beat up his wife, Laura, brought him to Christ. Don something, I forget his last name, but he became the Commerce Secretary, and he was one of W's big fundraisers. The big fundraisers usually become secretaries of commerce because then they can trade off the perks of the Commerce Department to large corporations and business executives for campaign contributions to get the president reelected.
Wow.
Both parties do it.
Secretary of the Interior. I'm looking for the name of that guy. I can't easily find it. But I want to go back for a second to Dr. Malik. Now, I can't remember which of you just said that you had a conference in a skiff. Was that with the pathologist? Was that you, Larry? Did you ever meet this guy, Craig Malik, who's on the screen here?
I never met Malik. Cogswell I did, and Kathleen Janoski, and I think there was one other that I did at the time. They came to see me. They actually went to see Chris Ruddy first. Jack made reference to the Pittsburgh Tribune. Chris started writing stories about it. Then they came to see me. And then, of course, Jack, entered the fray and wrote the definitive book on the subject. But I never actually met Malik, and I didn't know of his involvement.
The thing that's so interesting is that now he's in Broward, and he's presiding over another strange, death investigation with Barrington Wisenet, another prominent Black American, an important role in government, who basically just dies under mysterious circumstances. Jack, do you know anything about Craig Malik?
I don't know anything any more than anyone else knows about that.
It's interesting, though, and also, Larry, you brought up Chris Ruddy, who, of course, wrote the book The Strange Death of Vince Foster. Seemed like he would have been enemy number one for the Clintons, but of course we've seen photographs of Chris Ruddy with Bill Clinton, and they're both looking smiley and happy, and apparently the Clintons financed Newsmax to some extent. It's strange to me when these people who seem like they would be enemies of the Clintons, like a pathologist who's demanding an autopsy of Ron Brown, who then you're telling me these other guys had their careers ruined. Well, this guy's now the medical examiner in Broward County, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. Do the Clintons have a way of carrot and sticking a person where it's like, hey, Vince Foster, how would you like $1 million?
Well, the Clintons are experts, and God forbid, they're still at it, but 80 people died during that administration, mostly material witnesses. At least 3 of my clients and quasi-clients, 2 whistleblowers from the White House in the first Hillary Clinton email scandal, had lists of dead people left on their chairs. And if the Clintons didn't kill people, they wanted people to think that they did. And then, of course, Linda Tripp had a list of 80 dead people left on her chair
right,
when she was about ready to spill the beans on what was going on at the White House. So, it's a criminal enterprise. And look, now you've got Jeffrey Epstein indicted. Note that Bill Clinton hasn't been indicted. Bill Clinton was the beneficiary of this whoremaster, among others. And they're above the law. Nobody will ever touch them in terms of government prosecution, which is why we have our citizens' grand juries. We're going to pursue the Clintons. I have actually indicted Hillary and convicted her years ago of breaching national security down in Ocala, Florida.
But let me stop you for one quick second, Larry, because you're raising an interesting point. At, I think it's Jeffrey Berman's press conference right after Jeffrey Epstein was arraigned, there was a question that was asked, why is this being handled by the Public Corruption Department? And I think people in the press pool were suspecting it was because there's going to be something happening with Bill or Hillary Clinton. What do you say about that from a legal standpoint?
I say nothing's going to happen, no more than it's going to happen with Attorney General Bill Barr and anything else. There'll be a report. Nothing will happen. Jack knows the history of the higher-ups, the elites walking off in the end. In fact, it was the Trump Justice Department under Attorney General Barr that indicted Epstein, and of course, Epstein is friendly with Trump. Okay, he's been to Mar-a-Lago a lot. Some of the women that were implicated in his trafficking schemes worked at Mar-a-Lago. So they're going to use this to get to Trump. That's what
Trump, it should be noted, had thrown Epstein out of Mar-a-Lago at the request of his a parent of one of the girls he had been hitting on, an underage girl. James Patterson wrote about this. I read the book a few years ago, Patterson's book on Epstein, and I remember that detail. And in fact, as soon as the Epstein thing, I went up and pulled the paragraph and put it up online. That Epstein and Trump are no friends. But you're right. They know each other, of course. You know.
Right. I'm not saying that the president did anything wrong. I'm saying they're going to use this to try to steer.
Yeah,
right.
They already are.
And who let the thing go forward? Attorney General Bill Barr. So that tells you something right there. Okay.
Well, just in the last few minutes that we have, I want to take you guys back to Ron Brown. And of course, the latest information drop is this FBI vault file that is more than 225 pages. Jack, I know you've been going through this since it was released a few weeks ago. What would you say is in here of significance? Is there anything that jumped out at you as new information?
Not so much new information, and it's difficult to read through because there's so many redactions and so many repetitions. But what it does do is confirm that the rundown was up to his neck, and this is a $700,000 bribe from the Communist Republic of Vietnam, which at that time was still holding back information on American POWs.
Wow.
May still be doing it today. And he did it so blithely and so confidently because, and to Larry's point earlier, you know that for the most popular politician in Washington, you're pretty close to bulletproof.
Well, you are, and you see, this is a case study, this is the major leagues, okay, in terms of bribery.
Yeah.
But look at Manafort. I mean, I feel bad for the guy, and like everybody else does, but clearly he was involved in some illegal stuff, and that's what they do. They trade off of influence, their friendship with presidents, their appointments as cabinet secretaries. They're dealing with some really shady stuff with countries that, frankly, don't play by our system of justice. Of course, few people here do as well. But this is a case study in these lobbyists who become fundraisers and others in Washington, D.C. And, of course, now you have Gregory Craig involved in things. He was the Clinton impeachment manager in the White House. It spans both political parties. And they collaborate with each other. Everybody's, scratching everybody's back. They're raising huge amounts of money. They're becoming ultra rich. They have ostrich jackets, among many other things. And this is Washington, D.C. This is the swamp of Washington, D.C. Both political establishments are deeply embedded in this capital of corruption.
The fact, Larry, that the only Silicon Valley metro is the average median income higher than it is in Washington, D.C. metro, which is just horrifying. I mean, when you think about it.
If you go to Washington today, Jack, I'm sure you do, go to Southwest. Look at how that place is just taking off. I mean, this used to be basically a slum in Washington, D.C. Boston, the money that is flowing through there is unbelievable. There's never been a recession in the history of this country. And they're just stuffing money into their pockets. And people who work for these politicians a lot of them never bother going to college or university. They don't need to. They're millionaires by the time they're in their mid-20s.
Now, Forgive me for asking you guys to speculate, but I'm going to do that because it does seem quite unusual that the FBI would release a document from 1993, very old document, more than 25 years old. Why do we suppose they're doing this right now? I know Larry is very prone to basically predict that nothing will happen, but I always come back to the point that everybody thought that Donald Trump would never be elected president. So what if we have passed through the looking glass and we're in the world of unknown outcomes? Could this be released in preparation of a Bill Clinton indictment? Is there evidence here that will play into what we're going to learn from the Jeffrey Epstein trial?
Look, I'll indict everything I own, which isn't much. I mean, I'll not indict, Freudian slip. I'll pledge everything I own that's not going to happen, Jason. I think somebody probably filed a FOIA request. I don't know who it was. It wasn't my former group because Tom Fitton, knew that I was the one handling this investigation. We've been competitive over the years. He doesn't want to give anything I do oxygen. So it wasn't Judicial Watch. But someone probably filed a Freedom of Information Act request, and that's probably why it came out.
Yeah, I'm curious as to who filed it and why, but sometimes Trump does things that makes me wonder what's going on. For instance, he gave this major address a month or two ago in Montoursville, Pennsylvania. Now, Montoursville is a town of 5,000 people. However, it is also the site of the 16 students and 5 of their mentors who were killed on TWA Flight 800. So I'm thinking, do they know? Are they just trying to send scares into the Democratic ranks? I don't know. I don't think anything's going to come of it, but at the same time, they may just be playing with them.
It may be some historian that wanted it, Jason. It's not in any. I assure you, 100%. I admire your optimism. Okay? And I'm optimistic.
Give me 99%, Larry, so we got 1%.
I'm optimistic doing it another way, having the American people rise up legally and peacefully. Absolutely. It's not going to happen in our government. It's not going to happen. They protect each other. I've been doing this for 30 years. Nobody at the high level has been held accountable by the government.
Right. Well, with regard to citizens standing up legally and peacefully, people can go to freedomwatchusa.org and they can view the Robert Mueller indictment in the Citizens Grand Jury. We had some really fascinating testimony from Dr. Jerome Corsi, really great insights into the horrible perversion of justice that is Robert Mueller's investigation. Truly awful. I hope that people will visit freedomwatchusa.org and support Larry and his team at Freedom Watch. They need our support. There are really no other lawyers that I see in the United States fighting for our freedom. People can also go to Cashill.com. That's Jack's official website. His latest book is about the crash of TWA Flight 800, the cover-up and the conspiracy. That's a fascinating book. You've written quite a bit about aviation. And Jack, I understand you have another book coming soon.
Yeah, right now I'm working on a book on, actually, Larry and I are involved in one project that we're not allowed to talk about right now. It's fascinating. I am involved, I am halfway through a book I'm writing called Unmasking Obama. And the subtitle is the fight to tell the true story of a failed presidency. It really celebrates the people and the citizen journalists throughout America who worked for 8 years to keep that administration honest. And some of them did a brilliant job,
Wow.
Because they weren't getting help in major media and getting very little help from the established conservative media.
Well, more like the opposite of help. And you've just reminded me, actually, Jack, I saw an interview you did, I forget who with, but it alerted me to something that I wasn't even aware was an area that you've delved into, which is Barack Obama's relationship with the despicable Bill Ayers, who, and I wanted to let you know about this, because you were talking about how Bill Ayers may have ghost-written Dreams of My Father, or whatever Obama's ridiculous fake book was about. I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this article published in the New York Times on September 11th, right. 2001, where Ayers says, "I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough. Now, again, I am convinced that newspapers like the New York Times, the Washington Post, not everyone there, this is not a conspiracy that permeates the ranks of the entire place, but there are people who know that there is a way that coded messages can be placed in plain sight. And to me, this is certainly at very least suggestive of foreknowledge. I don't know what time during the day the New York Times gets printed for a given day, but certainly I would expect it to be prior to 8 a.m. So this would have been on newsstands at the time that people were arriving at the World Trade Center, where President Trump insists there must have been bombs in the building.
Well, I don't know about that, but what I will say is this, that Bill Ayers' morning came, the joy of Bill Ayers' morning came to a crashing halt about 3 hours after that paper was published, because he became a total pariah for a while after September 11th, if you recall.
I don't recall. I didn't even know about him in September 11th. What happened that made him a pariah?
I was not following that in 2001, but in researching it, it became obvious. Yeah, it was a timing nightmare for Bill Ayers.
Yeah.
Well,
anyway, guys.
Yeah, we've got to wrap it up here.
Like the wars at this point, so carry on.
Larry, I will email you my phone number immediately after the show. Okay.
Wonderful. And definitely in the future, love to have you back. Jack, specifically, we could talk some more about Bill Ayers. Larry, I'll speak to you very soon. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today.
You're great, and like I've always said, not only you're a tremendous investigative journalist, as Jack is an author and investigative journalist, but you tell the truth, crowdsource the truth. I hope people will support that.
Thank you very much, Larry, and thank you, Jack.
Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for watching. See you soon.
Thanks.